Everyone. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon, introducing Riverside's Balance Assessment Playbook. We are so excited to have you join us today, wherever you are, streaming in. But we are really excited to talk about over the next hour or so this new resource that Riverside Insights is launching called our Balance Assessment Playbook. And we will deep dive into it and talk about why we created it, how to use it in your district or in your school or in your classroom, and really what tangible benefits and actionable steps that it allows you to have to ensure that all of your students' needs are being met in the classroom and that you have the best assessment program to meet every student's needs and help them reach their fullest potential. Before we get started though, I just wanted a couple quick logistic and housekeeping announcements. Please engage with us throughout this webinar. So if you have any questions or comments or ideas that you want to share, there's a Q&A panel on the side where you can drop in whatever you'd like to ask or say. And we will try and incorporate your questions and comments throughout our discussion. So we really want this to be an engaging session, and we'd love to hear your feedback and your ideas throughout the session. We will also, at the end of the session, send out the recording and the slides. And we will send out access to the actual balance assessment playbook. So you will have a tangible copy of it at your fingertips at the conclusion of this session. So be on the lookout for that email. But without further ado, let's jump right in. Really excited today to talk with you and my colleagues, Tina and Allison, about the origins of the balance assessment playbook and how it can help you in the classroom or in a district or in a school ensure that every student has the opportunity to meet his or her full potential. So let's kick it off with some quick introductions. So we have here, I'm so excited to introduce my colleagues Allison Boyven and Christina Jordan, who are assessment experts. And I wanted to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about the work that they do now, the work that they did previously, and why they really care about building the best assessment program, and why they were very interested in helping us co-author this balance assessment playbook. So Allison, do you want to kick it off for us?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Boyven. I have been at Riverside Insights about 3 years now. I am a national academic advisor, and in my role, I support sales, primarily with product knowledge and presentations and things with all the group assessments. So Iowa Flex, COGAT, and all of those. So in my time before Riverside, I spent 9 years in the classroom. I was a 4th and 5th grade classroom teacher. I used a lot of data with my students from assessments, shared with parents and parent conferences all about assessment data and how students specifically were doing with all of their skills. After teaching, I spent 9 years in the district office of that same school district. And I spent a couple of years going out to schools and really helping them build a balanced assessment plan. So there were 50 schools I needed to support. And I sat with administrators and helped them look at all of their different assessments. I was a school data analyst in the assessment department then. And then I also spent a few years managing all of the district formative assessments. So teaching teachers about how to write assessments, helping them look at the data, but then look at what are all the assessments they're using in their schools.
Amazing. And a lot of the resources that we pulled and the ideas that we have in the assessment playbook were taken directly from a lot of the work that you were doing at a district of creating a whole district-wide assessment plan. So your experience is so valuable and tangible in this playbook. We're really excited to hear your thoughts, Allison, in a second. Passing it over to you, Tina.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Jordan. I am also a national academic advisor at Riverside. I was a classroom teacher for 25 years and have been in the ed tech industry for about 8.5 years now. When we were talking about putting this together, all three of us were very passionate about this, but my experience as a classroom teacher, I had to do a data-driven classroom for the last several years that I was in the classroom, and it was really scary at first, but what it ended up doing is making me a better teacher. And I was getting a realistic, holistic view of my students. I was understanding their ability. I was understanding skills that they were missing. And the school I worked at was 45% EL students. And so what we learned is that we were misidentifying some of those students for special education when actually it was just a language barrier. So finding out where my students were by having a holistic view of them was something that really helped me target my students' needs, help them learn better, and helped me be a better teacher. So that's why I wanted to be a part of this.
And we are so grateful for your experience that you're bringing to the table here. I think Christina has a really valuable perspective on how assessments play out in the classroom and how each student is really impacted by the right assessment data or the wrong assessment data, and ensuring that we have, the best programs in place to support every student in the classroom. So it is a dynamic duo here of co-authors for the Balanced Assessment Playbook. My name is Anna Hausman, as I mentioned, and I work on the marketing team here at Riverside Insights. But before that, I was an elementary school teacher as well for a number of years, and then a regional assessment director. And the reason I'm really passionate about this work is because I saw when the district that I taught at, we were 100% focused on closing the achievement gap for our students in a way that was where we would start test prep in January or February and stop instruction at that time. And so we spent about a third of the year just test prepping with our kids. And as a result, they did really well on the state test. And then over time, as the content got more rigorous and more challenging, they really lacked some of those critical thinking skills that were more important in the long road. And so when I came to Riverside and learned really what different types of assessments meant and how to employ different data points in the classroom, I realized in retrospect that my district was relying too heavily on summative achievement tests to really understand our students' learning and growth. And so as a result, we were unintentionally leaving kids behind and misidentifying kids that really and failing to teach students about a lot of the critical thinking and problem solving skills that would help them in the long run. So that's why I'm super passionate about this. And the three of us think that this playbook is going to have hopefully some tremendous impact and be able to actually help you create the best assessment programs that in your districts or in your schools to ensure you're meeting your students' needs. So we're really, really, really excited to jump in. Before we get started, why now? I think why does creating the right assessment program matter today? I think we've all probably seen a lot of the NAEP data that's come out in the past couple of months. And we're coming off of this, 3 years of a pandemic where school and education was really disrupted for our students. And some of the NAEP data is pretty shocking. I think this is the math data right here, and we've seen a larger drop in some of the national math scores for the largest drop we've seen since 1990. We've seen steady growth over the past couple of years, and then COVID hit, and it really impacted how our kids are learning or what our kids learned and how our kids are performing on some of these assessments. And then similarly with ELA, we've seen a little bit of a drop here with ELA as well. And so there's this prime opportunity to really think about what our kids need, right? We're coming out of the pandemic. We're seeing the result of some of the past 3 years of instruction. And it's a really good opportunity to reset for a minute and think about what do our kids need and how do we ensure that we can get them there? Do we have the right assessments in place? Do we have the right data points in place? Are we using the data effectively in the classroom? And so those are kind of the topics that we're going to talk about over the next couple of minutes. Tina, I know you wanted to share a little bit about some of the other research that's out there and how it impacts or how it ties into what we're thinking regarding the building a balanced assessment plan.
Well, so I just wanted to point out that if you look at that grade 4 number dropping 3 points, 3 points doesn't seem like a lot, but it's pretty significant because there have been several studies. The one that we're citing here on our slide is from the Annie Casey Foundation, but there are several studies out there that tell us that if students do not read by the end of 3rd grade, that their dropout rates from high school increase significantly. And so a lot of states have a goal of reaching that literacy and reading by 3rd grade, but the fact that there's a 3-point drop in our 4th graders shows that we really need to target that. So again, looking at that data, assessing what we're using, and make sure it's really targeting our kids is really, really important, especially in those third graders, soon to become fourth graders, because we don't want to see kids on that dropout track. And it just tells us that our interventions need to be stronger to make sure we get those kids back on track.
Awesome. So when we think about the entire education ecosystem, we kind of want to put this in context and really think about how assessments impact everybody involved in education. You know, we think about frequently test day in a school, and we think about the teachers being impacted by tests, and we think about schools making decisions for tests, but really every single person is in a school ecosystem is impacted by assessments. And when assessments, you know, when testing goes wrong, or when we have the wrong assessments in place, we're really spending excess time testing. We are spending excess money testing, and we don't have the right data points, and we're leaving students behind. And so the wrong assessment program, or assessment programs that are not as strong as they should be or could be, are really impacting the entire education ecosystem. Allison and Tina, anything to add to this about like when testing, you know, goes wrong, or when we don't have the right assessment programs in place?
I would add that in particular with formative assessments, Anna, you had mentioned that you spent a lot of time just prepping students for how to take a test and stopping instruction and really focusing on test prep. And really our time in the classroom needs to be spent with the instruction and instructional strategies, and really digging into the data and looking at, you know, where are they on a daily basis with their skills. So, and that speaks to formative assessments, the classroom assessments, but we certainly need the data on the summative and the diagnostic, but not having all of those in place, and then you're kind of scrambling for, you know, this one assessment at the end of the year is going to count for so much, whereas if we had data along the way, it wouldn't be such a big deal. There's that piece where we spent so much time, so much focus, so much energy on this one test, where we really just need to have that balance across the year to really know where our students are going. And knowing before administration, you know, what is the intent of testing? What are we trying to learn? You know, before we instruct, or before we instruct as well as test. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would just add to that when testing goes wrong, we leave out a whole bunch of students, like you mentioned, Anna. And I know when I started to have to do a data-driven classroom, it was really hard at first to look at some of the numbers and say, oh my goodness, almost my whole class missed that subject or that topic that I taught. And had I not looked at that data, I would have just kept plugging along thinking, well, I know all my kids didn't get it, but most of them did. And I would make assumptions. And so then I was putting my kids further and further behind. So looking at that data, even though it was hard to see sometimes, gave me a really specific path for what my kids needed. And it allowed me to back up as a teacher, course correct, and then make sure that they were moving forward with the knowledge that they needed to continue building on that learning.
100%. And I think we've gotten to a point now where we have this culture of over testing, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but to us, like when testing, when it feels like we're over testing, it means we're not testing purposefully, and we're not using the data, we're not maximizing the data in the classroom, and we really need to take a stop and evaluate, are we using the right assessments? Are we using the data intentionally? Do we understand, do our teachers understand why we're testing and why we're administering an assessment and how we're going to use the data, and do our students understand that? And so those are some things that we'll be talking about shortly that are infused throughout the Balanced Assessment Playbook. So what happens when testing goes right? And what happens when we have the right assessment program in place? Tina, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Sure. So as I mentioned, when you're looking at the right assessments and you're targeting students where they are, then a lot of things happens. First of all, you can pull in your families for support, right? When we have testing that goes wrong, you have families that are frustrated, you have families paying for tutoring sometimes that's unnecessary. But when we actually test properly and we know where our kids are, both with ability and achievement, then we can engage families on how to support us in the classroom. Our students are more engaged in learning when they have the proper targets and skills needed. And so when we do our tiered instruction, when we do testing right, that really gives us that what I need time for our students. And those groups are fluid. And so when we're looking at data properly, then we can move kids from those tiers, to different levels, depending on where they are at different times. And so you have less stress from your students, less stress for the teachers. It allows us to plan better, engages families more efficiently in supporting our students in the classroom, and it's just a better overall environment for our students. It also allows us to really focus on the diversity of learning that we have in our classrooms. I think that as educators, we are really good at saying, oh, all of our students have different needs and we want to target those needs, but then we have 33 kids in front of us and it's really difficult to do. So using our assessment tools properly and analyzing that data properly really helps with us being able to target those diverse needs of all of our learners. And it also helps with our support staff too, when you have people coming in to support maybe some of your struggling learners or your gifted and talented students, having the right data helps our support staff as well.
I would just add.
Go ahead, Allison.
Yep. I was just going to add that it's about efficiently growing that student learning. We only have students for so long in our classrooms, and if we don't get it right, then we've just added to the pile for the next year with that teacher, really trying to figure out where that student is in their learning. The other piece is transparency. When students understand why they're being tested, when the teachers understand why the assessment's being given, when the parents understand all the way through, your stakeholders, and everybody's on the same page, it makes for a much more comfortable environment. Everybody's aware. There's less stress on everybody, a lot, as Tina mentioned, but it's more understanding across the board when it's right.
And we need to remember too that our students are our biggest stakeholders when it comes to our assessment. So including our students in that process, as Allison mentioned, and having them write goals. This is what I got, on this assessment. My goal is to improve by this much. And then having them put down, this is what I'm going to do to help myself get there. And even the young ones can understand simple goals and map out a pathway to success when it comes to their growth in the classroom. So we have to remember that they are stakeholders too, and we need to include them in that process.
So I think to summarize, both of what you have both have said, the entire ecosystem is impacted by assessment programs, right? It's not just our students, it's not just our teachers. It is the entire educational ecosystem that is impacted, good or bad, by the assessment programs that we have in place. And so we really hope that this balanced assessment playbook helps you understand the holistic nature of an assessment program and the impact that it has on every single person that works or interacts with a school, and it helps you put the right structures in place to make sure that we are maximizing our time and our resources and our data points in the classroom. So moving on, we are absolutely thrilled to launch the Balanced Assessment Playbook with the primary goal of helping you as an education leader build an equitable and sustainable assessment program to meet every learner's needs. This is an interactive workbook and playbook that you can take in entirety, or you can take sections of depending on your needs. And we really hope that this is a tool that will help you take a step back, understand your entire assessment program, and understand where you might have some strengths and where you might have some areas for growth. Throughout this playbook, we have infused research-backed best practices. We have infused interactive workbooks. We have infused resources that can direct you to some of the best practices that are out there. And we have really tried to structure it in a way so that you can engage with it as you need, and that you can find some answers and some best tips and some resources to help you meet your program's needs. So we're really excited to dive in right now and just show you a little bit about what the Playbook has to offer. And we're hopeful that this is going to be a helpful tool in helping you ensure that you have the right data for your students. So to start, our Playbook has 4 sections in it. So we'll walk through each of these sections shortly, but section 1 is really about assessing your assessments. What assessments do we already have in place? This is a much easier task if you are the principal of a school or a teacher in a classroom. I think it's simpler to understand all the assessments you might have in one building or one grade level, but it's challenging when you're spanning across an entire district, and some schools might be adopting certain assessments and others might be adopting certain assessments. And so really taking the time to understand what assessments you are giving across your school, your district, or your grade level, and understanding why you're giving them. Section 2 moves into testing culture and environment. What is the culture that you have right now about or surrounding assessments? Is it a positive one? Is it a negative one? And what are some best practices and tips that we can share to ensure that you have the best culture and environment for your assessment program? Section 3 is about assessment instruments. How are you choosing the assessments that you're administering to students? And do you have the right criteria in place to really ensure that you are choosing the best assessment tool for your learners? And then section 4 is about data and insights. So how are you using the data in the classroom to really make academic decisions for your students? So these are the 4 sections. Like I said, you'll all be receiving a copy of the Balanced Assessment Playbook shortly after this webinar. But we wanted to kind of walk through each of these sections in a bit more detail and give you a glimpse, not the full preview, but give you a glimpse of what each section entails and how you can potentially leverage it in the classroom or in your school. So to kick it off, our first section is assessing your assessments. Allison Artino, would one of you want to talk a little bit about this section, the purpose of it, and what our goals are with this section?
Sure. So this first section is really taking a deep dive look at what your current assessment practices are at the district level or at the school level. And really trying to figure out what is the purpose for each assessment, right? That purposeful and intentional testing that really needs to occur throughout your school or through the schools in your district or diocese. And it's one practical way to do it. From one thing I experienced was using like chart paper or after giving a survey. So you want to give a survey to the schools or to your teachers and say, we're going to do a deep dive. What assessments are we giving? What is the purpose? Which grade level are you giving your assessments to? Which population? Really having that hard look. And why are we giving all of these? And then really kind of deciding as a holistic view, maybe in an Excel spreadsheet or through chart paper around the room, what is everybody giving and is there any overlap? So that's a lot of what this section is talking about, kind of looking at current practices and really kind of making some decisions about maybe we need a summative, maybe we need a diagnostic. When I was at the school level in co-writing our school improvement plan, we discussed we needed a 5th grade diagnostic at the beginning of the year because we didn't have any way to assess from 4th grade to 5th grade where kids were coming in for writing in particular. So really seeing where there are gaps in your assessments, whether you need more formatives or benchmarks along the way, things of that nature. Mm-hmm.
And I would add to that, are we using our assessments to their fullest capacity? A lot of times when we work with schools, we will say, we'll have schools say, well, we use this for this one piece of data, and then we don't use it anymore. And we have conversations with administrators and teachers, and we say, but you have all these other data points that this test is telling you, and you're not using it to your fullest potential. So instead of purchasing other tests, let's take a look at what you have, what you are supposed to be reporting. We all know that states require us to report certain things, federal governments, local levels. Does this assessment give you those data points? And if not, then you can look at what else you need, where those gaps are, but really diving into the full potential of the assessments you're already using.
100%. And so this section is really broken into two parts. One is a district assessment survey, which we'll walk through in just a second. And the other is a section about building equitable identification process for English language learners, gifted and talented in special education, and ensuring that you have kind of done a big an overview of how you are identifying students for special programs, and if you have the best assessments in place for that. So moving on to the first section, which is the district assessment survey. Allison, can you walk through a little bit about what this district assessment survey is and how schools should think about using it to understand their whole assessment program?
Sure. So yes, it's a template, certainly, and it's really designed to kind of put down, pen to paper or to computer of what assessments you are giving, and you can see here, put in your school and put in what specific grade level, and then really dig into, well, as a school, do we give a state assessment at the end of the year? Do we give any district benchmarks, or do we give, something from just our classroom? Do we do interims? Where do we have our assessments broken out throughout the year? How do we give them? Are we expecting all of our students to test online, or is there some, paper pencil along the way? What time frame? Maybe we're, heavy in one part of the year and we're not, maybe we need a diagnostic somewhere, or we need some interims. And then again, why are we giving it? So taking that hard look at maybe some of our assessments are just giving us more of the same data instead of more of different data. So really taking a look at, are we assessing that culture of over testing, right? Are some of our assessments showing the same information over and over, but yet we're missing the ability piece, or we're missing English language learner piece, or our special education students are needing different assessments that we're not providing. So having that ability to look at it holistically.
And Tina, what types of questions do we have do we craft for this section to really help you think, or to help district and school leaders really take stock of their assessments and think about what works well and what doesn't work well?
So again, I would go back and say, first of all, what do I need to be assessing, right? There are certain things that we are just mandated that we have to report depending on where we are in the country. Different states require different things. And then are there any needs that are specific to me here at my district level, or even where I taught, my school had very specific needs that were different than the rest of the district. So how do I meet the needs of my students that are in this specific building too? And again, I agree with Allison, like, are we getting repetitive data? I remember there was one point in my teaching career where I was like, how many data points do they need on this one kid? I mean, I felt like I was giving a test and a test and a test, and I had like 20 data points on one student. And what was the purpose of that? Was some of it just extra that I didn't really need? And I think that having a forum like this and a way to walk through this could be done at multiple levels. Principals could do this at a district level in their principals meetings. Teachers could be doing this in their PLC meetings. And just because the needs are going to be different at different levels. So really analyzing what we need and what helps at the level at which I'm working.
Absolutely. So really this is kind of, as Allison and Tina have talked about, this section is really to help you take stock of what assessments you're giving, in what grades, in what subjects, how you're administering them, when you are giving them, and what the purpose is. We did an example of what this district assessment could look like. So Allison, would you mind walking through kind of from a very high level how we were thinking about completing this survey and how it would help a district or a school leader really understand the entirety of an assessment program?
Sure. So you would want to start, especially if you're at the district or school administrator level, you're going to want to start with what are the mandated assessments that we have to give during the year, non-negotiables, and you outline those. For example, that summative, that state assessment, we have to give that. And then, what does it assess and how are we going to give it to students? And that may be, different format depending on your student population. And then what's that time frame and purpose? And then of course, who's taking it, right? Is it all students? And then really filling in, okay, what are, maybe there are district or diocesan mandated assessments, right? Maybe there are some benchmark assessments that we give throughout the year. And so kind of putting those in. I really also would say have teachers be a part of this too, because their classroom assessments are in here. Their maybe pre and post unit assessments are going to be added in. So really, not only just the teachers being involved, but the administrators too, seeing what's going on at the classroom level. What is that one student going to take throughout the entire year? So it does give that big picture of, look how much we are assessing, or is it the right amount of assessments? Are we learning that different data each time? Are we getting a full picture and a full flavor of that student and their abilities and their achievements and accomplishments and what skills that we still need to address in the classroom through instruction? So through this template, really trying to provide a variety of the assessments during the year so that you can see, do we have enough in one area? Do we have too much in another area? Not enough somewhere as well. So.
I think that's a great overview, and I think I'm hopeful that this example will help you kind of visualize what this looks like at your school or in your district, and how you can really take the time to understand why you're giving each assessment. I remember when I was a teacher, I had no idea why we were giving each assessment. Just like I said, we were just trying to do well on the state test. But each assessment has a really different purpose for our students. And so this template really helps you kind of identify what those purposes are, and how you're assessing kids throughout the year. Moving on to our next part of this section 1 is really thinking about what identification referral processes we have in place. Tina or Allison, you want to talk a little bit about some of the best practices and sample reflection questions that we have in this section?
Sure. So when we are looking at identifying and referring kids, we're talking about, for example, we use an assessment to identify our students for our gifted and talented program, or for our special ed program, or anything in between that you have at your school. And one thing that we often find is that what maybe the district is mandating is not necessarily what is serving a particular school. And in my school where I taught, like I said, I dealt with a very high immigrant population. So we had a lot of smart kids in our school. They just were new to this country, and they did not have English as their first language. So when looking at gifted and accelerated programs for them, we were not serving them by using the district mandated like 97% cut score, right? So for me to use something more local and look at local norms for the assessment we were giving was more realistic, because I knew I had kids that were smart. I knew I had kids that were gifted, but they had a language barrier instead. And like I said, I think we tend to over-identify our EL students for special ed programs. So also, beyond just using that for identification in like gifted programs and things like that, when we are looking at does this student need support in a specific subject area, providing them with an assessment in their language, if we can, in their first language. Because what you might find out is if they're taking the test in English and they, for example, do really bad on a section on inferencing. I don't know, I'm just pulling that out of the air. But then when they take that same assessment in their native language, they understand the concept. So you don't need to reteach inferencing to that student. They already understand the concept. They just are struggling with English language, not the actual thought process and the concept that goes along with the skills that we're teaching. So it's really important to take a look at, do we have the proper tests to serve the students that we're working with? And does the test that I'm using allow for local norming so that we can more purposefully address the needs in our school?
And I would just add that, especially when we're looking for different program placement of students, to really triangulate that data, look at those several points to ensure, from Tina's point about, is it a language barrier or is it a skills gap? For example, we want to know for sure what the student doesn't know versus it's just a translation where they had difficulty. So, and for gifted and special needs as well, really digging into, how are they doing in the classroom? How they do on their summative? How they do on their diagnostic, their benchmark, and really taking a hard look at those as well.
Absolutely. So as Tina and Allison kind of shared, this section is really helping you understand your identification and referral processes, and helping you ensure that you have the right structures and systems in place to make sure that we're not over-identifying or under-identifying students. We provide throughout this part a list of recommendations and best steps that are all research-backed, and links to additional resources for you if you are struggling to make sure that you have the best program in place for your gifted identification, or your English language learner identification, or different processes for for referring students for special programs. So we hope that this section really helps you take stock of your identification referral processes, and helps you ensure that you have the best systems in place that are going to equitably identify students for a variety of special programs. So that is this section. Moving on to our next section is really about testing culture and environment. What was the purpose of this section, and why did we create it?
So actually, when we were talking about this the other day, we were kind of giggling about all the things that can go wrong in a testing environment and things that people don't think about. And Allison brought up, she said, well, it was always so cold in my school on testing day. Like they cranked up the air conditioning and it was so uncomfortable that you were distracted by the temperature in the building and not able to focus on the testing environment. Is there a state tornado drill that week during your testing week? Is there supposed to be a fire safety drill? All of those things that are just basic logistical things play into the testing environment. But also we need to make sure that we're involving the entire community in prepping them for this environment too, and that includes the parents. And I'm just going to speak to this, and then Allison, you can talk to some of the other things. But as a parent, I mean, I was a teacher, so I understood how to read the assessments. My kids' assessments would come home and my husband would open them up and hand them to me and say, here, tell me what this means. So really taking the time to explain to our parents, this is what the environment is going to be. This is when we're going to be testing. This is how you can best prepare your kids to test that day. Give them a breakfast. Make sure they go to bed the night before. All of those things that parents can do. And then after the assessment occurs, this is how you understand the data, and this is what it means for your students. So simple things like that can really do a lot to help alleviate stress on the students and the families that are involved, as well as the staff when they're giving the test. Nobody wants a fire drill going off in the middle of their test. So.
Sure, I would add to that. Making sure students are well prepared with practicing what kinds of questions they're going to see, thinking about the room setup. When they walk in the room, is there going to be paper over the walls, maybe to cover up concepts and charts and things? Is it a different seating arrangement? Are they going to have to go to a different room? So it's really thinking about, for students, it's stressful enough to test anyway, but what's all around them that's going to be completely different? So are they fully prepared as well? In thinking about this too, I was thinking, some schools might do admissions testing, maybe on a weekend, for example, a Saturday morning. So do they know what door to go in, for example? Do they know, where the front office is? Do they know who they're going to talk to beforehand? Who's going to guide them to the classroom, or things of that nature. Just enough that the student, when they sit down to test, they're not trying to, rehash their morning of, oh my gosh, it's been so stressful that, am I really ready to test right now? It needs to just be a really smooth process. That's what this whole section is looking at. Are they ready to test? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And one thing that we've really tried to emphasize in this section as well is, how are you framing testing to students? When I think back on my own K-12 education experience, there were years when I was so stressed out by assessments, I had to take tests in different rooms. And it was because when I think back, tests were framed in a really pressure-filled way to me. And it was more of a performance measure than a tool for my teachers to use the data to help me ensure I was reaching my full potential. And so I think that there's a way to really ensure that you are helping frame assessments for students in a positive manner that helps them understand how the data is even being used in the classroom to help them grow, and that it's not, solely a performance measure or solely a reflection on their performance on that day. So we've really created this section as a way to help you understand if you have the best culture and environment in place for your students so that they have the opportunity to really perform their best. So moving on to section 3, this section is all about assessment instruments. So what instruments are you actually using? What is your formative assessment? What is your summative assessment? What is your ability assessment? And how do you, when you know you need to choose a new assessment, how do you make sure that you're choosing the best one to meet your students' needs? Allison, do you mind elaborating on that a little bit about kind of what we've included in this section and some of the best practices that we've shared?
Sure. So yeah, with different assessment instruments, it's really looking at why you're selecting a particular assessment to give. Is the research behind it, or the field testing of items, for example, or what the item types are going to be. Really thinking about why we're going to give a particular assessment, what is important, the online, the format. Is it going to measure what we want it to measure? That's a big part of it, the achievement or the ability or something else. So that's a lot of what this section's about. Looking at our best assessments that will really help you gain the insights that you need.
Tina, anything else to add to that?
I would just add, making sure that if you have students that speak multiple languages, there are accommodations in place for those students. Is it in their native language? Do they have accommodations for your students who are dyslexic, your students who may have 504s with special accommodations in place? So all of those things go into choosing an assessment based on the population that you are teaching. So just make sure that you choose something that not only gives you the data that you're required by your state and your district to report, but also that accommodates the needs of the students who are sitting in the seats in your school.
Absolutely. We've also spent a little bit of time in this section talking about going into, when you're choosing an assessment, actually spending the time going into the research guide and understanding how the assessment was normed, how the assessment was created. If you're going to be using data, specifically like national normative data or something along those lines, it's really important to understand what you're comparing and how that data was collected. Otherwise, you could be unintentionally using the wrong metrics to make decisions about students. And so really encourage you through this section to do your due diligence with an assessment, establish a list of criteria that you know you need to consult when you're choosing a new assessment, and dig into the research guides, dig into the assessment overviews, ask the questions: how was this assessment created? Who created it? How is it normed? Like, what sample of students was used for the normative data? And really understand what metrics went in and what inputs went into building the assessment, because it matters if you're going to be using the data to make decisions about students.
Well, and I would also add to that too, it's good to assess what you're currently using to make sure that it's still meeting the needs of your community. I know where I live, we've used a certain test for many, many years, and now all of a sudden people are saying, our community is changing. It's not the same group of students that we had 15, 20 years ago. So do we need to look at alternate assessments or different assessments that will better serve who we are? So checking in on what you already have, just because it's been something that's been good enough for a long time doesn't mean it's still serving your population.
Absolutely. So moving on to our final section, this section is really about data and insights. How are you using the data to maximize your student growth? Christina or Allison, do you mind talking a little bit about this section and our goals for it?
This is a lot about your professional learning communities, and really having those in place to have a culture where talking about data is a safe place for teachers, that they don't feel that it's punitive, that it's against them, that it's a culture where they don't want to talk about the data. So this is really, what insights are you gathering from the different assessments that you're administering? Are you learning everything you can or everything you need to learn about your individual students as well as your school, whether you're also at the district level, and gaining all of those insights, but then also creating that culture where teachers are comfortable sharing. And I would add to that about having protocols in place, the importance of keeping it objective when you're talking about data pieces, really digging into the numbers and not looking at the blame of, whose fault it was, the students didn't perform well, but collectively, as a school, these are all of our students. As a grade level of teachers, these are all of our students, and how can we support all of our students? And a practical piece on that might be, I'm good at teaching fractions. I'll take your kids for the day. And I saw that, your kids didn't do as well there. So I'm going to teach them. Where, my kids didn't do as well in geometry, and you are stellar on teaching geometry. So instructionally, where does this go in the classroom? But it's really creating that culture of data should be a comfortable thing to talk about, rather than I don't want to show anybody my scores. I don't want to talk about it. I want to put it away in the drawer and never look at it again, and kind of move on. And to that point too, I would say with teachers, with students, Tina, you had mentioned it earlier, do students have a way of tracking their data? Do they have a way of showing, in a notebook, I did really well here, and these are the skills I'm missing. So, where are their strengths? Where are their weaknesses? Is there a data wall somewhere in the school building? Are there announcements shared, as a grade level or as a team? This is where we did really well. Our reading scores went up, in this many points or in this grade level. So it's really celebrating that growth, celebrating data in general. Maybe we're, not so strong in this area, but it's okay. We're gonna get there, and really having that positive feel around data, because a lot of teachers are scared to talk about it. Mm-hmm.
And I think with that too comes training of teachers, right? How do you actually read this data? I mean, just because you see a score that's maybe lower or a trend that's going down instead of up, that doesn't mean that something is wrong in the building. It just means that we need to look at that trend and see what that means. And so really training teachers not only how to analyze the data, but what do those scores mean? I found out after being a teacher for a really long time that I was reporting grade level equivalent improperly to my parents, and so was everybody in my building. I mean, my principal told me how to report it. So when I had to do a data-driven classroom and somebody actually told me a different way to analyze that, I was like, oh my goodness, I had no idea I was saying that wrong. So training your teachers, making sure that they're appropriately looking at those scores and understanding what they mean. How do they communicate that data to families? And then now that we have this data, now what? Are we going to look at the ways we're structuring our classroom? Like Allison said, do we need to team up as a fourth grade team and divide out these math skills with people who have strengths in that area? Do we need to focus one of our teacher professional development days on something that we learned based on this data? So really making sure that once we have the data and we've analyzed it in our PLCs, there is a space and a plan for the now what comes next. And like Allison mentioned earlier, really triangulating that data to make sure that we are getting the best picture of all of our students that we possibly can.
And you might leverage too your district assessment specialists, or somebody else on your team who's really strong at looking at those data scores, that NPR, and what does that mean, and that standard score, all of the scores that you're going to get from your different assessments. Certainly that's, assessment departments can certainly help, curriculum instruction, they can really support. So just another tool, and vendors certainly can support with understanding the data.
Absolutely. This section is really broken into two parts. One is data-driven administration and one is data-driven instruction. So if you're an administrator, how do you look at data comprehensively across an entire grade or school or even across the entire district and make decisions about what needs to happen, versus if you are a teacher or if you are coaching teachers, how do you look at data within a classroom and really make decisions about individual student growth or intervention or differentiation? When I think back to when I was a teacher, I knew what score to look at to understand like how my students ranked up next to each other or how much they grew, but I had absolutely no idea in retrospect and in hindsight what that score actually meant. Like, what was it telling me about that student and the way that student was thinking and the way that student was learning? And if I had known that information, I think I would have been a much better teacher and been able to make far more growth for my students. And so, really thinking about what is data, being a data-driven administrator look like, and what is being a data-driven instructor look like, and how do you maximize and leverage every single data point that you're getting on an assessment so that you're using it purposefully in the classroom or in the school building or in the district. So hopefully this section really helps you take stock of what data assessment practices that you have and where might some areas be that you can make some improvements or adjustments to really maximize how you're using data from an administrative or instructional perspective. So kind of circling back, we have those 4 sections. Oops, sorry, went too far there. Circling back to think about the entire ecosystem again. We've talked about what it looks like to think about your assessment tools, what it looks like to think about the testing culture, what it looks like to think about your entire assessment program. And we wanted to take a second and circle back to that ecosystem and how it all interrelates together to really maximize and strengthen and build the best assessment culture that you can possibly build at a district. Allison, you want to speak to a little bit about how all of these are kind of layered on top of each other and work together to ensure you have a really strong assessment program?
Sure. So you might start at, especially with district or even at the state level, thinking about the goals, right? Of what are the goals that we want to achieve in terms of student achievement and student abilities, and what do we want to learn, and our graduation rates, and all of those types of goals that play into it. So thinking about the assessments that really align to those goals, and then thinking about it from the district and then down to the school level. Are the assessments that we're giving aligning to our goals that also align to the top goals? Are our school goals aligning to the district? And so are we administering assessments that are going to help us meet as many of those goals, hopefully all of those goals, as much as possible? And then down to the classroom, down to the student level, does everybody does have a part, but really looking at what assessments are we administering from classroom to school to district to state, and everything needs to align to those goals so that in the end we're all in that same ecosystem, all playing together as one big team. It's really important. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It's all related, and every stakeholder, every single person that works in an entire education ecosystem is impacted by the assessment decisions that you're making. And so the goal is to align everyone on the goals and the vision and the purpose of why you're giving a certain assessment, so that the student knows, as well as the parent, as well as the administrator, as well as the teacher, and that everyone is on the same page as to why a particular data point matters and how it actually impacts that student growth. So kind of in some of our big takeaways from this balanced assessment playbook, and some of the things that we hope to leave you with, and we hope you'll dive into the assessment playbook when you get it, really thinking about some of these big questions. Are you purposefully and intentionally assessing your students? Are you using the data points that you're getting, and are your assessments really giving you the right data to maximize your student growth? Are all of your stakeholders aligned with your assessment priorities, from the classroom level all the way up to the district or even the state level? And then how do you maximize your resources and your instruction time once you have assessment data? We have a limited amount of time with our kiddos in the classroom. and we want to ensure that they're learning as much as possible. So how do you maximize that time and ensure that every decision and every interaction with your students is actually driving towards their personal and academic growth? So really, we have created this balanced assessment playbook to help you as an educator ensure that you have the right assessments, the right data, the right tools to meet your student needs in the classroom. You are the experts with education and with instruction, and you are the experts on the students that you teach. This is just a resource for you to really help you ask the right questions, potentially find the right research-backed practices, and really evaluate your practices in total so that you can be the best expert you can be and that your students can make the most growth that they can make. Tina, Allison, anything else to add to this as we wrap up?
I just want to add about the time frame. You know, there might be a question of, well, when should I create a balanced assessment plan? So one of the points I think about is particularly in the summer, when you're rethinking for the school year and you're setting, you know, we finished out the school year, here's how our students performed on our assessments this year. Now let's roll up our sleeves in the summer and incorporate teachers in it too, not just a school administrator piece, but really look at, okay, as we level set for the next year. For example, you might also think about when new administrators come on board, maybe, you know, as a team overturns perhaps, and we want to think about, okay, you know, we've got this opportunity to really look at where they were as students and where do we need to go next. Maybe during you know, semester change, that kind of thing, when there's a time change. As well as student populations. Student populations change. They graduate, they go to middle school. You know, new kindergartners come in. So just thinking about any of those times really are good times to level set, to take a look back at the assessment plan that's been created and do we need to make changes. Mm-hmm.
And when you're looking at, is this tool we're using successful? Make sure that you have measurable goals in place. What defines success with an assessment when you're utilizing it? And make sure that if you have a long-term goal of having an assessment give you data on a student so that you can target interventions and you want every student to reach this goal by a certain time, make sure that you set stop gaps along the way to check in and see if it's going the way that you planned. Do we need to pivot? Do we need to include anything else during our instructional day? All of those things, so that by the time you get to your end goal, it's not this runaway train that you've lost sight of. So make sure you take time to measure along the journey.
Absolutely. Well, we are right about out of time. Wanted to quickly plug our next webinar is next week. It is about starting and scaling social emotional learning programs within your district or in your school. We have some outstanding panelists for this webinar, so we hope you tune in. Just as a recap, you will receive a recording of this webinar along with the Balanced Assessment Playbook in the next couple of days. And we really hope that this is a helpful tool for you. And we're really excited to be able to launch it today with you here so that we can hopefully use our resources and use these questions to help ensure that you have the best assessment programs in place. And with that, I just want to thank Allison and Christina for their incredible work on the Balanced Assessment Playbook and for taking the time today to share with us some of the tools and resources in the playbook. Really thankful for both of your contributions to this, and I know this is going to impact educators across the country. So with that, we thank you for joining us today. Please let us know if you have any questions. Be on the lookout for our email within the next couple of days, and we hope to see you next week at our next webinar. Have a great afternoon, everyone.